All right. Let's see here. My computer sort of plopped down a little bit. What are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about grant basics a little bit, although there are definitely other webinars, and there's a quarterly webinar that sort of can go into sort of basics about getting an account set up in Flux and those types of things. And we're always available to answer those questions. There'll be a slide at the end that has our contact info, but you'll probably hear me say a bunch of times throughout the presentation, go ahead and email grants@mnhs.org. It does go to our grants admin team, but we're really quick about triaging it to the right person, so we'll answer right away. So you don't have to sort of like spend a lot of time wringing your hands or wondering who's the right person to email with this question. There's kind of a general account that we could do with that. And then we're going to talk about why good research is needed. We're going to talk about the development of a research plan, conducting the research if your project is funded, and some information about a research report, which is the final product of a research project. All of our grants with the Minnesota Historical and Cultural Heritage Grant Program, which is easier said as the legacy grants, they're all very project-based, and so they are projects that produce a product. And so with research, it is a research report, and we will definitely talk about that. We would love to sort of answer any questions that people have. And also, I think John will feel the same way about this. We do have a Q&A sort of slide at the end, but it's rather informal. So if you have an urgent question or a not so urgent question, feel free to just either type it into the chat or unmute yourself and ask away. All right, what's next here? John, I think this one's yours.
Yeah. So research applies to a number of different projects, and it's one of the most useful categories in a way. It's where a lot of things start. So exhibits for sure need a lot of good research. There's historic signage projects that need it. Film projects, book projects, all that, will usually start with research and writing if they don't start with oral history interview. And then I wanted to throw in that, since it's the month for Heritage Partnership applications, that quite a few of the programs that we fund through the partnership program involve a lot of research too. So there might be an interpretive plan that you're trying to do for, multiple organizations. You might be researching methods for something you're trying to do that isn't, perfect for the legacy grant program. And then sometimes you're doing something that's original enough that you have to actually research what the procedures are going to be to actually do what it is that you want to do. So, yeah.
So that Heritage Partnership Program, that there's a required pre-application with that, and that deadline is next Friday, the 23rd of January, correct?
It should be, yes. I'm just going to double check, but yeah, it's definitely next week for sure.
All right. Ready for the next slide?
Yes. Yeah. So, like as Todd mentioned, the Grants 101, webinar covers this in a lot more detail, but just, for grants, you want to make sure that the organization that's applying is eligible. You want to make sure that the project you're trying to do is eligible. And you could spend quite a bit of time talking about, what makes for an eligible project, but basically, I think everybody here that I know is eligible already, and they would know that. But you want to make sure that your organization is a 501c3 nonprofit, can be a unit of local government, and it can be one of the federally recognized tribes that's in the state, and an educational institution. So those are the applicant organizations that are eligible. And we'll keep mentioning the research report, but generally, if you're doing the research phase of and it's going to be under the research and writing category, The product is pretty predictable for us, that you want to do a research report that's got, the summary of your research process, your findings, and then an annotated bibliography of the sources that you found. And then we talk about applicable standards for research in the manual. We put QR codes in here just in case you want to, go to these now. When they'll also be scannable once this has been recorded and posted. But there's all these links are in the manual, but we have those guidelines for historical research and writing. The Secretary of Interior's, these are federal standards and guidelines for archaeology and historic preservation, and those are the ones that we follow ourselves and expect to see from those kinds of projects. And the statement on peer review of historical research, we don't exactly say that you have to do peer review, but when you're coming to us with a manuscript of some sort, for example, or your exhibit text, when you're applying to actually implement those kinds of projects, then you're going to be attaching the manuscript or the exhibit text, and then you're going to need 2 letters of critical review, and that's essentially peer review. It's for someone who has, and that's not me, someone who's done peer review through academic journals, it works a little differently than what we expect. I think we're a little less harsh on what we expect from those peer reviewers and from the content that's being reviewed.
It occurs to me, like, I know, John, you're going to talk a little more towards the end about, potentially the writing components that could come out of this after the research, if you're going to produce exhibit text or a manuscript for a publication or something like that. But I didn't put my usual slide in there when I'm doing other interpretive stuff of that, since we're talking about eligibility. One thing just to remind folks about that are listening in, that we can combine in these projects many things, including, so a common thing that we'll see with research projects is to also then write the manuscript or the exhibit text or something like that, which is fine. But one thing that we can't do within that is the implementation of that interpretation. So if we'll just keep it on an exhibit for simplicity, if you're creating an exhibit, you can certainly do research and writing together, or just research. What you can't do in the same grant-funded project is what we call the implementation, and in the case of an exhibit, that would be the fabrication and installation of it, or with publishing, it would be the printing of it, et cetera, et cetera. So always a good reminder. Certainly love it when people are excited about their projects and want to sort of like put everything together. But in part because of that peer review thing, we require, when you're at the implementation step, that's when we want the peer review piece, and we don't want to sort of like manage or during the process of a grant. So we ask for it with the application for the implementation. So it can be a little complicated if you're new to our grant program. I'm happy to have more discussion about it if you're asking. Looks like Wendy's got a text in there, or in the chat. Do you need peer reviews for interpretive plans too? No. Just for the implementation is where we require it. I'm definitely sort of, especially on research, not so much for interpretive plans, but on research, if you wanted, I would encourage anyone to include peer review of their research report. Not something that we require, but yeah. John, do you have anything else for this slide?
I don't.
All right. Oops. I think this one's me. I think that we're in for the Todd show here for a few slides here. So, and John's covered a little bit of this, but why good research is needed. So the bullet points we've got there is, how research quality affects project success. And for me, that's good interpretation is built on good research. Often, Wendy's asked about an interpretive plan, and like, to me, the interpretive plan is sort of like how people are going to sort of like feel in sort of like big picture arc things that they're going to know once they sort of engage with your interpretation after they visit your exhibits or watch your documentary or that. And generally speaking, they're not necessarily going to leave knowing all of the facts that they have committed to memory, that 20,000 tons of grain moved through this depot in 1932 or something like that. But all of those facts are what what the interpretation and even the themes are built on. So that's a reason why we did good research. Some of the common pitfalls of inadequate research. So things to keep an eye on when you're doing the research is to watch out for bias creep. We all have biases, and that's in some ways also where the peer review, if you did engage in that with research, can be very helpful. But so watch out for that bias creep. The use of incomplete records or not using or understanding the context of those records, so it's essentially cherry picking of information, and then outdated or irrelevant resources, and then not in, or if you are using those resources, not really interrogating the source itself. And so they're great resources in many ways, but I think many of us that are at county and local museums, that organization did a centennial community book in the 50, 60 years ago, and there can be great factual information in there and even good interpretation of the research of the history in there, but there are certainly products of their time, and they might leave things out. They might not be fully representative of narratives either that you want to engage in your research or that you might sort of like not know about. So again, they can be very good uses, very good resources, but it's just sort of interrogating that text. And then just the idea of sort of correlation versus causation, which is, can be a little bit philosophical, but sort of like just because something happened didn't mean that it was caused by something else, and sort of being able to understand all of those factors. And then some examples of strong and versus weak research approaches, and this is sort of, kind of summarizing again, but strong thematic research questions versus broad topic-based questions. And and then also, again, the corroboration of cross-referencing versus acceptance of single sources. So those are just things to keep in mind for good research. So when applying to the grant program for a research project, what we're asking for in the application is a research plan. And there's a couple of ways to do this, and we can cover it a little bit through the presentation of where it can be in the application. Generally, it can be in your project description or in your work plan and timetable. I'm also an advocate for, but we don't see this very often, of just creating a separate attached document that you can upload to your application that is your research plan. And what a research plan is going to have is going to be it's essentially the questions that you are asking in your research. What do you seek to answer, and sort of a description of like what you already know about the topic, and then again moving beyond the topic of not like when did this happen, and where did this happen, but also just as much and possibly more of why did this happen, how did this happen. So those types of things, and then are definitely present in a research plan. And you're also going to want to talk about how you're going to scope that research appropriately. That's essentially where are you going for the information. And it's not, as I say, a blood oath contract. If you say we're going to the Acme County Historical Society, it's really there to sort of put guardrails on there. Those of us that have done research, and I have done research, but I also sort of say like, my research historian skills are completely atrophied at this point. But I definitely sort of know, like, and have been there, that like, you kind of go down these rabbit holes and there's something interesting, and this sort of like keeps those guardrails on there, because you're always going to sort of like have those, and you should explore those things when they have some merit to them. But it's sort of like the research plan just sort of keeps you on pace a little bit. And then John, do you have anything to add to this? Oh, you're muted. But
there's a lot here. I'm going to talk about research plans coming up, so I'll leave it for that.
All right, I think this next slide is yours.
Okay. So, we get to see some, a lot of different examples of research plans, and like I say, like the ideal for us is if it's a separate document. It's makes it easier to see exactly what you're planning to do in your research plan. But it's also very common to put it into the narrative of the application. Some people, I'd say most, put it in the project description, and then they summarize it in the work plan and timetable. And so there was a book project that St. Olaf College did that I point people to quite often when they're asking for examples. It's kind of, for me, it's a super well done research plan. We don't expect every research plan to be at this level, but anyway, the things that it includes are very helpful to hear in research plans. So, for example, the location of where you're going to do the research. In this case, they were going to go across the street to Carleton College and look at the papers of the college president over there. They include the timetable of like when in the grant do they expect, the year that they have the money to spend, when did they expect to do this research, included that, always helpful. And then, like I said, the target of the research, like what they're actually going to look at. It can be, if you're doing research on a month, obviously you might be looking at much more than just one, collection of papers or something like that. And then in this case, they were also interviewing a couple of writers and researchers in the area who knew the information they were interested in. So my color coding, I needed to update that. But anyway, so the research and the interviewing, those are like the methods that they're going to use. That's always helpful to hear. And then the time estimate, it can be less relevant for the research plan, but for reviewing a grant, it's super helpful because, we can kind of, correlate it with the amount of hours that are being paid for in the budget, things like that. That's always helpful. Next slide. So again, this was later in their research plan, where they were looking at, they've done the research. What are they doing at the end of this project to analyze it, summarize it, and what are they doing to help them in their next phase, which is super important. A lot of people know they're going to do this and they don't really think to write it down for us. But as far as reviewing and thinking about funding a project, it's always helpful to just hear that all the steps or what all your steps are going to be. I mean, not everybody does exactly the same thing. And then they're having a point in the project towards the end where their supervisor, project overseer, in this case, what they're calling them, looks at the report. And that's something that's super helpful to hear, make something more fundable when we know that, you're doing that quality control yourself. And this is something that could be pulled out and put into the impacts and indicators, because this is exactly, very simply what we're looking for. You're producing a research report, and then somebody who is not doing the work, who's not getting paid to do the work, and is knowledgeable, is going to look at the report. That's the indicator, is that, it's been checked for quality. And and then cherry on top, they told us, where they're going to be putting the results of this phase, which is just research. And a lot of people think in terms of, I'm researching for a film here, my final product is going to be the film. But when you're doing research, the product of the grant is not the film yet, and so you need to think about, this is what the product's going to be, this is where we're going to put it. Since it's public money, everything needs to be, theoretically findable by the public to check on, these products that have been paid for.
All right, I think I've got this next one. Where is this? I guess this is a little bit of both of us, but and this is in some ways we've covered some of these things, but just more on the conducting of research. In the St. Olaf example that John was sharing, they're doing some interviewing of some folks. So our grant program can also fund oral histories that follow the guidelines and requirements of the Oral History Association, and those are a thing and have their own requirements. We do have some latitude and flexibility in the grant program to also, with a research project, to do what we would call informational interviews, which would look very much like oral histories and might sort of act like them, but wouldn't necessarily need all of the requirements for that an oral history project would have. But you could certainly combine an oral history project with a fuller research project, and then have the oral history interviews and the products of that meet the Oral History Association standards along with the rest of it too. So in some ways, it's a kind of like, what is your sort of capacity in some ways to make that choice, and it's definitely something that we can help you think through as well. We've talked about primary and secondary source a little bit, at least about sort of like being able to interrogate the sources, and certainly knowing the difference between primary and secondary is I think something that hopefully everyone knows and understands. Primary certainly is a document that is historical in and of itself, and secondary is generally an interpretation of that. And then I don't know, John, I don't know if I've got ethical considerations in research to sort of like go off the cuff here, but if you've got anything to add to that.
So just think about them, address them if they're there. It's something that's, not quite as much of a concern as, like if you're doing research on people in psychology or something like that, then it's something you have to address very prominently. And
I think of researching medical institutions and those types of things, and so if we see that that's what the project is, we're going to want to see in the application that how you're is again that this will be sort of like publicly available, and it's intended to be like, how are you going to be able to treat that as well. So
yeah, so it's like in archaeology, they might be dealing with sites,
locations.
They might be doing the digs. It might just be like trying to find material, collect material on different areas, and sometimes that the communities around those sites are very much against that stuff being publicized. They don't want pot hunters or things like that getting involved. So yeah.
All right, and then the next one here. Now we're getting kind of the next slides are going to be sort of about the application fields, and this is kind of like the wrap up on sort of like the big picture. And so we've talked a lot about that these are product based and that they produce a research report. And we haven't really gotten into a lot of detail about what the research report includes. But the research report for us is essentially a narrative, or it could be a detailed outline summary of what you discovered when you're researching, specifically in relation to that to the research plan. And so we're going to need that. These bullets got a little goofed up here, but and then an annotated bibliography of all of the sources that were consulted, and all is important too. It might be something that you might have consulted a source that didn't sort of like make its way into your sort of summary and interpretation of it. But as John and I have been saying, that these products are for others as well. Certainly it's primarily for you and how you're going to use it. But I like to think of them as sort of like a roadmap of for someone else who might be sort of researching, if not the same topic, a sort of adjacent topic. You might be researching railroad in a certain community, and somebody else is researching railroad in a different community. But there could be some information that they could sort of use your research report from, and specifically the bibliography to sort of see, are these sources that I should consult? And that's where the annotations are extremely helpful. It's there's kind of an example here on the side of the slide of what can be included in an annotated bibliography. And the annotations, certainly it's the sort of like, it's the sources and that, but the annotation is a 2 to 1 to 2, maybe 3 sentence sort of like a summary of what it actually is. That, you know, these letters here, you know, the Todd Mahon letters, that they cover local history services at the Minnesota Historical Society from 2015 on, or something like that. And so like that annotation is extremely helpful. And then I like to see, and we don't require this as the third component in the research report, but I definitely encourage it, and it's useful because, as John was also saying, that these are for others as well, as to talk about how you're going to use this research. And in some ways it's quite obvious, like, you know, and it's probably in your application, we're using this for our exhibit or whatever, but you might have sort of come across some other sources too that you can help others or yourself do with this for later. So the intention is to do an exhibit, but you found a whole bunch of 16mm footage, and there's a documentary here for later. It might be my organization that does it, or it might be another organization that does it. But and you don't have to spend thousands of words and dozens of pages on this. Usually we're looking for, you know, a couple of paragraphs at most, maybe one paragraph, just to sort of describe what you think this research can be used for, certainly for what your original intention was, but if there's something else that's been revealed for it too. And then, so we've got a URL there too for from the American Historical Association about annotated bibliographies too. All right, now we're getting into the application itself. And so the one of the great things that's easy about our grant program is it's the same application regardless of your project. If you're putting a roof on a National Register building, you're doing a research project, you're doing an oral history project, it's the same questions. It's budgets, project description, need and rationale, work plan and timetable, et cetera, et cetera. Now we want different answers, of course, for these things, but they've all got the sort of same format. And so in many ways, the grants manual is kind of laid out by the questions in the fields that are seen in the application. And so I like to kind of also do these presentations a little bit by that. So budget. This is where you put in the expenses and for your project. And for an exhibit, for a research project, is generally speaking personnel, travel, copy, and access fees. I like this one here, and I'm blanking on who the applicant was, but this one has that critical review in there. Again, we don't require that, but if you want to do, part of the reason why I encourage people to do it too is like it's a legitimate expense that you can line item expense that you can put into your budget. And in this case, they're also working with tribal and community organizations for assistance on it. So they're putting that into the budget as well. So these are pretty common and typical budget line items that you'll see in it. Probably the hardest thing with these projects is figuring out how much time it's going to take to do these things. And that's in part why that research plan is sort of helpful, to sort of help you say, look, here's where we got to go. It's going to take less time if it's in our own archives, but if it's 100 miles away, well, that's going to increase the time. So those things are sort of, they all kind of link up together. John, I don't know if like I'm going too far off the script now that we have one, but like like when I'm reviewing and I see the number of hours that somebody has for the research, to me, it's an information point, and it kind of helps me understand how much time they put into it. But I don't necessarily feel like I'm going to say, no, this isn't going to take 150 hours. It's going to take 70 hours or 300 hours. You should be able to sort of explain how you came to that figure, and then of course the request will reflect that, and so you should be thinking about that deeply, because if you do request and we award the grant, and you find out you need twice as much time and twice as much dollars for it, we're not going to increase the grant amount. We can talk about changing the scope of the project, and if if another grant later would be appropriate or something like that. But again, like this is where you want to sort of like put in your time on that.
Yeah, I agree. The explanation and the justification for your numbers is as much or more important than the specifics. Like if it's something way out of line, like we want to pay somebody $2,000 for 10 hours of work, we'll question that. But you may not be doing the work. You may be getting a bid. Hopefully, you're getting 3 bids. And vendors are asking for what they want to do the work, and it's hard for us to question that too specifically.
We sort of started off with talking about eligibility on things, and this isn't so much on the project, but this is we see it a little bit with research projects because many of our applicants, though certainly not all of them, are history organizations, and so they definitely have the skills and to do research. But one of the things that the grant program can't do on the sort of budget line item side is this concept of supplement versus supplant, and we cannot. The legislature has set it up this way. We cannot supplant someone's existing funding. We can only supplement it. So if you have and I'm just making these numbers up, if you have a 20-hour per week part-time staff person and you wanted them to do the research, then we could, with the grant, fund up to 20 hours a week for them, or 10 hours or whatever. But what we couldn't do is supplant, sort of say, okay, we're going to move them off of their current funding and use the grant funding for the work. And where it really comes quite obvious is with a full-time person. If the work is paying for them, then that is supplanting their existing funding. Can be a little wonky, and I think I'm explaining it quite poorly at the moment, but happy to further explain that if anybody's looking for it. A common question that I get for these is, can you do out-of-state travel for a project? And the answer is a qualified yes. It's certainly eligible, and again, this is where you have to explain, like, why are those sources the ones that you need to do for this, and that. So generally speaking, we're going to see way more Minnesota travel in these budgets, but we definitely have seen and have been able to fund out-of-state travel as well. All right, I'll go on to the next one here. Project description, that's the probably the star of any application field, and probably where, if when in doubt you don't know where to put something, you can certainly put in the project description, but if that makes the most sense to you. This is where you're gonna, again, lay out the basics of that research plan. You're going to talk about the questions that you're seeking to answer. And again, you're going to move beyond answering when and what questions and ask why and how questions. Not ask why, or you do want to ask why was this location selected for the train depot, not where was the train depot necessarily. You want to answer both of those questions for sure. But and then, what are the factors that made this community prosperous? Those are the types of questions if you're doing one of those community history projects. Sources that you want to identify the sources that you're going to use. Again, published and secondary sources. If you're identifying unique resources, and then identify the likely archives and historical collections that will be known and accessed. And you also want to talk about what you generally already know about the topic. Usually there's something already known about it, and so you can sort of confirm to us that here's what you know and here's what you're going to expand upon and build upon. I mean, it's the sort of the old, what are the known knowns and the known unknowns sort of thing. Yeah, you want to be well articulated with your research questions, and then, yeah, I think that's kind of a lot of things that we've already covered with it. All right, moving on to the need and rationale. The need and rationale, I always just sort of like generally describe this question as why this project and why now. So you can talk about how the project, what future project the research is going to support, the documentary, the exhibit, the article, that type of thing. You can also talk about how existing bodies of research are not focused on or don't address your topic or your research questions. And so, this is where you're going to be making connections to your history and preservation priorities. I probably don't have anything to add to that. But you're going to want to discuss this project and why it needs research. And this can be challenging to address, but you should. And so talk about ultimately what it's going to be for. And, if it's centennial of the community coming up, and that, so you want to have an exhibit in 2 years when that centennial is coming up, that's perfectly good need and rationale piece. And I think also we always really like to sort of see that, like, we're covering sort of things that haven't been covered before. We're expanding on existing research, so we're always looking for those things too. All right. The work plan and timetable, and we've sort of talked about some of these things too, but like, I've got some other things in here that aren't just about the research project too, that we definitely like to see in it when you're talking about, like, well, your process and your timeline for hiring the researcher, or we call it procurement. So we want to hear about that. If you are going to be doing either true oral histories or informational interviews, talk about how much time you're expecting for that. And again, like, we're not here to sort of like to overly analyze these things, but we can definitely notice if you say we're going to interview 30 people and that's going to happen in 3 weeks, we can tell, like, well, that doesn't seem realistic. And it's not even that we don't want you to interview 30 people or those types of things, but we can sort of tell, like, well, is this plan that they've got put together here going to work? If you're going to other libraries, we're lots of cutbacks across the state, certainly here at the Minnesota Historical Society with our reference library and other places. And so, do you know and understand how open and available those places are? We definitely also like to see in your work plan timetable the actual put in there, not just that you're doing the research, but like how much time is it going to take to do the report for it. In that research plan that John provided an example of, they've got really good information in there, not only of the writing time, but in essentially the review of the writing and the review of the research report too. So those are definitely the types of things that we see and are looking for. What are realistic timelines? I mean, like all things, it depends. 3 to 9 months is, are common things that we see for grant projects that are coming into our grant program, which are generally so our small grants are now $20,000 and less. So we're seeing research projects that are in the $10,000 to $20,000 range. And we see research projects come into the large round, but they're generally in the, $30,000 to $50,000 range. And those things can tell us about how long it's going to take. But really, like, we're looking for you to tell us what that timeline is going to be. John, anything to add?
Yeah, just no, I think you're making good points there that you really explain to us what you're doing. Like, there's not just one way to do a research project, and especially if you're trying to do something that's that hasn't been done exactly the same way you're doing it, or hasn't really been addressed very well before. You might end up doing way more research than your final product might show. And it's okay if that's the case, and just tell us about it.
Yeah. All right, next field in the application is the enduring value. So voters created the amendment that with the sales tax funding source, and the legislature created much of the guidelines for it. And one of the things that they want for this is enduring value. So it's something that we ask for in the application. And essentially, it can be sort of described as like, how can Minnesotans or people in the future certainly access the product, and also, generally speaking, sort of like benefit from it. So we've kind of peppered some of the comments in there about like how people besides you might use the research report, and why we ask for some of those sort of pieces with it. But this is in the enduring value section, is where you can sort of describe at a minimum how this is going to be made available for others to access. And the easiest way to do, certainly if you're from a county historical society, say we're going to put it into our archives, and that's an easy way to do it, and certainly that'll satisfy all of us that are reviewing the applications. You can definitely sort of like expand on that a little bit. what we aren't looking for here, to be clear, is like what that final product is. And John mentioned a little bit too, like it could be for the documentary. And so the enduring value isn't for this grant project isn't the documentary and the accessibility of that. Think about what the product of the funding for this specific grant is, and then how people will be able to access that. All right. And then we're back to John, and we're kind of wrapping up the application pieces here, but measurable impacts and indicators.
Measurable impacts and indicators is it's a field that we don't have a lot of control over how to edit it. And, you know, it's not that there's anything wrong with how it is, but it's just the terminology can stump people a bit. And again, we're just, most of it is trying to tell us, like, what are your products going to be? Like, what are your products now and possibly in the future when you're talking about your medium term and your long term? And then your indicator is like, how do you know you've got that product? Because, you know, you hire somebody to do the work, and, you know, if you know them well, you know, maybe you can just take their word for it. But, you know, we want to know, like, how are you going to check to see that the work was done and then it meets your standards, hopefully the standards of the field. And so that's the simplest way to break it down, is like, especially for your short term, you know, what's your final product going to be? And your indicator is like, you know, are you going to have, you know, say a historian who might be at your organization who's knowledgeable about the subject that's being studied? Are you going to have them look at it and look it over and make sure that, you know, it's up to standards? You know, there's also some other things that you can get across to us when you're talking about, you know, short-term indicators. You know, like, especially if you're telling us, you know, we're going to find out about this topic, and, like, again, the indicator for that might be a little challenging. Like, how do you know that, you know, you actually explored this topic? You're not just like, you know, reiterating something that's pretty well known in the field. And yeah, also, yeah, talking about accessibility can come into this area. Medium term and long term, you know, we're not too judgmental about those fields, because you're having to project into, like, what are your next steps? And, you know, there's no way we can, like, necessarily hold you to it. But if you think, you know, oh, we're going to come back for another grant to finish this, you know, exhibit, just tell us. That's the, you know, the impact that you're looking for. And, you know, indicators for future things are very challenging. So you just say, you know, whatever comes to mind, as long as it makes sense. And, you know, long term, you know, you're looking for, like, what's the larger impact going to be of this? Like, why am I trying, you know, why am I doing this in the first place? And it could be that it's, you have a very local audience that is interested in this, and you know, you're not trying to change the world. That's great. Just tell us, and it should be good enough.
Yeah, I feel like we've been wet blanketing on the sort of end-to-end product of these, the documentary and the exhibit, stuff like that. This is where you get to sort of like show off and talk about, like, what you're gonna do with that. So, all right, I think this next one's yours too, John.
So since research is done in a research and writing category grant, like, I just thought I'd bring up, you know, writing. You know, there's the majority, probably majority of research and writing grants that come to us are just doing one or the other, but it's kind of a catch-all category. But it may be that, you know, as you're doing your research, you're going to start writing, because, you know, you have a good outline already of what you're trying to accomplish, and however you're seeing it, if you know you want to, like, start producing drafts, texts, whatever, just tell us what the plan is for that. And especially for some, more modest projects, they may see that they may, conceive of this as something that both the research and the writing only needs one grant. And so, you might split it in half. It might, however you're looking at it, just explain it to us. It'll probably be fine, but just give us a little detail so we know, what you're up to.
All right, then I think we're at the any questions slide, which is the second to last one. And I can just bring up the last one of contact information, so we can just leave it up there. But if folks have questions, we've got time.
That's right. Love questions. Thank you, Jane.
Climax, great. Thanks for joining us, Jane.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Well, to reiterate, and so if you're wondering if you've got questions and don't know who to contact, John and I are up there. We are usually the reviewers on research projects. John looks at publication and film projects. I look at other interpretation projects, although Gillian McGuire, who is one of our grants administrators with John, also does some of the a few of the counties that does exhibits and other things that I look at. And so Gillian will look at those. But so in some ways it can be like, well, who should I talk to? Always just send it to grants@mhs.org if you're the least bit confused, and or just email one of us that you've got the address for, and we definitely understand. So sometimes we don't know who to bring it to, so we bring it to the group, and so we've got our own questions. But all right, well, I'm always scared of silence, but I think this is probably enough. So we can sign off, but we'll hang out for a few moments too. But you're all free to go. But thank you for joining us.
Yeah, glad you came.